What's the most disturbing movie you have ever seen? The story you're referring to is from Japan, and it's probably the worst thing I've ever read, either than maybe the Toy Box Killer's tape. I've lived in Japan for over a year, and I think what makes that story about that girl even more sad and horrific is that Japan is a very safe/drug-free society. It's misogynistic, I would say, but it's pretty safe and not much violence, and there's even like no talking on trains and nobody hugs or kisses in public. So for some reason this story is extra disturbing to me, because there's something about Japanese brutality that has always been disturbing to me. Like what happened in World War II with massacres and sex slaves and Japanese army intentionally starving other countries. The level of cruelty that has come out of Japan in the past feels very barbaric and emotionless. And what disturbs me about this story is just the complete lack of emotions or empathy whatsoever. To kill or rape someone is one thing, but to torture and rape someone for months, and she almost escaped at one point, in the most horrific ways, then kill her, it's just so horrific. The first part is just normal British life, a couple who is about to get married, people working their jobs and focusing on their future. You see on the news that war is brewing in Iran and the Soviets might intervene. As it builds up, you see the local and state governments focus more on what might happen if a nuclear attack actually happened. People's lives are still somewhat normal, but there is an uneasiness as tensions rise. Then it hits a fever pitch, and everything begins to fall apart, and the likelihood of nuclear war becomes higher by the day. The characters, who didn't care about politics at all before, are suddenly face to face with the reality that they will be wiped out soon. Then it happens, and it's unimaginably disturbing and shocking. The actual nuclear attack scenes are incredibly disturbing, and especially the depiction of the days/weeks after is nauseatingly hard to watch. Sure, millions die, but what they don't show you is the tens of millions who are injured, who succumb to infection in the weeks after. The hospital scenes are some of the most shocking scenes I've genuinely ever seen. The rest of the movie, the actual attack is less than halfway through, is focused on the survivors attempting to rebuild society. It is not pleasant. Life is endless hardship and suffering and disease and death. It's presented as a scientific, research-based view of how things would actually go down. They try to avoid needless dramatization. It's very, very interesting, but more than anything it is incredibly disturbing and hard to watch because of how realistic it all feels. Basically, it's a nuclear holocaust movie set in Britain, and the movie starts off with the bombs dropping, but they're far enough away that everyone in Sheffield, I think that was the town's name, was alive. The point is that the war was bad enough that society reverted about 300 years in time, because all the electrics were gone along with running water and central heating, and it was a mess. People had to resort to pulling plows in fields because the tractors and all other vehicles didn't work because the gasoline ran out. You also had diseases suddenly showing up like cholera, because remember the whole not having running water thing? The movie advances 20 years and everything still sucks. The windows that were broken by shock waves in the initial blasts are still broken because there are no window factories running. There is no centralized government to fix things because London is basically a glass bowl that glows at night. Everything is now left to the individuals who are doing the best they can, but yeah, when you are at that point, things won't run well. At the end, a woman gives birth and the baby is deformed because of the radiation. Basically, it's 20 years later and everything still sucks. There's no superhero coming down to save you. You're toiling in a field to barely survive while freezing in your house at night. You see your television that hasn't worked in decades while remembering your life in the before times, and you don't even have the hope of a new generation because they'll be deformed and mutated from the radiation. The book is 10 trillion times better. Major spoiler, the book is written in first person from the wife's point of view. It's told as her writing letters to her husband, and you get tons of hints that something has happened to their relationship. A lot of times it sounds like he left her because he was angry with how unmotherly she is with her son, but the son acts very differently with her than the father. You can really tell the pain of her missing her husband and the life she always wanted with him. It's not until the very end that you learn the son murdered his father and sister, then went to school, locked students in the gym, and murdered them. I'm usually great at seeing plot twists coming from a mile away, but holy shit, I didn't expect that at all. It was shocking and gut-wrenching. Her sadness and longing for her husband is truly palpable, and as the reader, you sometimes really hate the husband for not believing his wife and then leaving her. The build-up to the end is stunning, and you're left completely empty and devastated. Wonderful writing. I was browsing horror/thriller/true crime on Amazon Prime Video and I came across this movie that looked interesting. I browsed the description briefly. This woman was approached at a cafe by a guy claiming to be a modeling agent. He had paid another patron to pretend to be a photographer. The model was then kidnapped, drugged, and handcuffed to a bed and was sold to be raped repeatedly. She ended up pregnant and he forced her to take an abortion pill. The kidnapper was also a dad and his little girl was sick and he was using the money to pay for her medical care. The woman escaped and the guy and his daughter were never found. She also had a boyfriend and a daughter looking for her and waiting for her to be found. Fucked with me since. I remember the woman telling this creepy guy that she had HIV and he told her, "That's okay, so do I. I've seen other horrible movies but this was based on a real story and it just really messed with me." I have a question. I cannot imagine watching any of these movies, and I never will. For people who talk about being affected negatively by these movies, and having that last for days and affect your mood, but you still seek out more, why? Are you getting enjoyment out of it? Because it doesn't sound like you are. And if you get no enjoyment, why do you watch? Edit. All the replies are very interesting, but sadly I cannot relate. Sometimes I wish I could. But I've learned the hard way that my anxiety is very much triggered by anything remotely horror. I say horror because scary things don't easily bother me, like jump scares or corn mazes. It's usually the psychological stuff, the meaning, the emotion that frightens me. I remember when I was around 15-16 I played FNAF, it was spooky, but the worst part was the lore. I was anxious and frightened for weeks because of it. A more recent example is RDR2, I watched a single video explaining the ghosts talking Easter egg and boom, can't play the game for a month. I just find it interesting the difference between my anxiety and yours. You get frightened and scared and anxious but it's not the type that scars you. I don't really know how to put it. Cargo 200, 2007, Alexei Balabanov. Unflinchingly horrific, Balabanov's film, set in the dying days of the Soviet Union, shocked many people. It features a psycho police officer who rapes and kidnaps a daughter of a high-ranking communist, a fly-covered corpse lying lifeless on a bed, manipulative state TV and the Soviet-Afghan war in full swing. State media reviewers and public opinion attacked the film as a misrepresentation of Russian history, and seeming a parallel of contemporary Russia at the same time, as the Soviet Union remains something that is purely nostalgic for them. The film was shown out of competition in Venice and won an award at the Rotterdam Film Festival. In Russia, several actors who regularly appeared in films by Balabanov refused to work with the director on the movie. There were doubts it would get a distribution license, but once awarded, the result was a film that caused a shudder to run through the whole country, hard to watch, even for the most seasoned viewers. There was one specific clip from a movie that completely killed my interest in gore and certain war movies. No clue what the name was or what it was specifically about, but it was playing on the TV in my living room, and the brief moment I saw was a group of journalists, maybe, fleeing from some group of foreign militants. They must have been Russian or Soviet or somewhere else along the southern Russian border. They were leaving a village that may or may not have been damaged from artillery or just mildly war-torn. They were sneaking into a small white car, probably a Lada. Then they get discovered and the militants start shooting at them while they begin to drive off. One of the guys in the back seat of the car gets shot in the knee and he starts screaming. That was the exact moment when I stopped liking gore. It felt way more graphic than I thought it would be. Camera at seat level, knee in frame, knee suddenly explodes and jeans ripped, short pause before guy starts screaming, I hate everything about it. This is probably going to seem tame compared to everything else on here, but this is England. Man, as a mixed-race kid to parents who had to deal with shit as an interracial couple in the 80s and 90s, it just fucking sucks. And it's so real, you know? Like sure I've seen some over-the-top shit in like Society and whatever, but nothing left me as numb as watching how easily people can just become racist, how easy it is for some people to be pieces of shit and how easily they justify in their own mind. Like not even mentioning the scenes of violence, which are very well done and really hard to watch, but just a real portrayal of racism. I'm England and how it just accepted. And it's very obviously a mindset a lot of the people around me share, like that's just real straight up racists, and I know that a lot of people in my own country, in my own life feel that way about me, or would feel that way if they hadn't decided that I was okay, that I was one of the good ones and it was everyone else that was like me that's the problem. Just left me fucked up for a while. Also greedy guts. That's just fucking bizarre. Schindler's List. Not sure I spelled that right, but seeing that red coat made me question if humanity has any value for a long time. The reality is these were not simply thoughts, but actions. That alone, the idea that these things happened. A child, murdered without compassion, for the beliefs their parents held and taught to their child. This is why socialism, communism, and fascism really creates. I urge anyone who believes these ideals to do some research on the consequences on limiting speech, law, and individual liberty due to social structures, and watch this movie. All the above have been attempted. The current most successful version of which is China. Observe and learn what inevitability happens when unchecked restrictions for the sake of simplicity does to people who simply want to live on their own terms. And learn the cost of that choice and weigh it against the power of others when given uncontrolled authority. A little red coat in a bonfire taught me. In reality we have two groups fighting for the same control, Democrats and Republicans. One wants a Christian ruling class and the other wants socialism. I would argue neither should be trusted. One of my favorite surgeons in the whole wide world, his resident kinda went rogue one night in my ICU, ordering nurses to do things that were against policy but not widely known that it was against policy, as it was a kinda weird situation we didn't often deal with in my ICU, and then when I told the nurse not to do it, he threatened to get me fired, and when I printed out the policy, he ripped it up and threw the paper in my face. One short email to his attending, and his attending didn't email me back. He walked down to my unit before his shift even started, pulled me off to the side to get clarification on what happened, then his face got all red. He was known for having got a bit of a temper and I was nervous even though he'd never yelled at me, and then, he apologized to me, and ensured me his resident would be by shortly to also apologize to me. And please let him know if he did not give a satisfactory apology. He did not give me a nice apology. It was a very short and cold exchange, but I figured the ass chewing he'd already received was good enough and just sent his attending an email thanking him for following up. I haven't worked with him in close to 10 years, but I still miss it. Such a great human. I'm 99% sure that's illegal. Debt collectors do illegal shit sometimes, but they can also get strung through the ringer if you report it. We'll probably get that shit knocked off. Here we go, check out subsection B of this law. That says they're not allowed to contact anyone but the debtor, except for the purposes of locating the debtor, and then only one time. If you're in the US, that should apply to you. So since they're not trying to call to collect contact information from the debtor, they're not allowed to call you. Even if they were trying to collect information about the debtor, they could only call you once. I'll do some Googling for you and figure out who you contact. In all likelihood, just telling them you've explained to them that you're not the debtor and calling again is breaking the law will get them to knock it off. Usually these debt collectors rely on people not knowing their rights, so just showing them that you do know your rights will probably be enough to get them off your back. They obviously think you're lying, but the law don't care. E2, here's where you can report. My guess is the state attorney general is your best bet, but you can report them to the FTC as well. But like I said, in all likelihood just telling them that they're breaking the law and you're going to report them will probably be enough. Good luck. I actually got yelled at for making a recruiter look bad to her client once. I would have felt badly, except the reason she looked bad was that she gave me the wrong company name to research, sorta close name, but it was an entirely different company, doing very different things, and b, she gave wildly incorrect directions to get to the interview site, which was in a newly built complex that didn't even appear on any maps yet. I actually left in time to get there 30 minutes early, except the directions were so far off they took me 2 towns over, and I got there 45 minutes late. As if that wasn't a bad enough way to start off a job interview, the very first question was, "Why do you want to work for us?" To which I thought I gave an excellent response based on many hours of research, of a totally unrelated company in a different industry. After some confusing follow-up discussion, it was finally revealed that I wasn't at the place I was told I'd be interviewing at, and everything else went downhill pretty quickly, even though the job itself was in my scope of experience. It was truly embarrassing. The recruiter actually called me about 30 minutes into my drive home, saying the client was very unhappy with the preparedness and punctuality of her candidate, and asking me what happened. I told her, politely but in clear detail, and it either didn't click or she just didn't want to accept that it was her failure, not mine. She then started lecturing me, in a very nasty, condescending voice, about how I needed to act like a professional and do my homework beforehand and always allow at least 10 minutes extra time to get to an interview. I again told her how she had told me the wrong company name and website, and gave me very wrong directions, and reminded her that I had no way to verify either of those as being incorrect beforehand. She said something like, "Yeah, right," and I said goodbye. Oh, my God. In June/July, I was notified that my rent was going to go up by 25%. I was to start paying more for base rent and pet rent after paying one-time pet lease fees and document fees. I had a week to decide whether or not to move out. With the current housing market, I had little choice but to nut up and just go through with the lease for another year. In this span of time, my fridge started freezing everything due to an irreversible design flaw. The maintenance man said I needed a new fridge. He called the apartment manager as soon as he diagnosed the problem while still standing in my kitchen. I was without a functioning fridge for at least 3 weeks. When I went out to sign the lease, I tried to haggle off the bullshit document fee because I'd been without an appliance that was supposed to be included in my rent. The apartment manager said, and I quote, "That document fee is how people like me make money. So you're telling me that you're literally making shit up so you can take my money and put it directly in your pocket? Go fuck yourself. I can't wait to be out of this shithole next year." Depends on your individual situation and majorly on if the collector is third-party or first-party collections. For instance, first-party can and will garnish wages. Third-party generally cannot, and via the FTPA, Fair Debt Collections Practices Act, cannot legally make that threat at all unless they actually intend to follow through. Normally it's just easier to allow a debt to go the full 180 days of deliquesce and charge it off. Bad for your credit. Write off for them. There are hardship clauses that protect debtors as well. Like I was collecting during Hurricane Katrina. Is it at all feasible to collect on someone whose complete life and security was destroyed and are fighting just to get clean water? Not at all. So it was best for my clients, debtors, to be afforded that relief so by the time and prevent any charges like past due or over limit. Same year I was working for third-party collections on Capital One accounts. They made $3.2 trillion on those fees alone. Over limit and past due. Kinda pissed me off. So know that there are collectors like myself that actually want to help people. Collection companies train their collectors in depth about the FTPA and actively tell them to ignore it, knowing it is federally illegal to do so. Because most debtors have never been educated on the FTPA.